Rogue and Bowmer stood along a peaceful, quiet shoreline in the mid-morning hour and looked out across the placid lake water in front of them as it reflected the tall, soft, puffy clouds that drifted casually by overhead. Bowmer, who held onto a comically oversized fishing rod, stared impatiently at the water as she waited for something to bite. She soon frowned slightly as her stomach let out a loud and tortured growl as it reminded her of just how empty it was. Rogue, meanwhile, sat next to her on a boulder with his fishing line cast out into the water. "Oh man, this is so lame and boring. Rogue, are you sure there's actually fish in this lake? I mean, I haven't caught anything so far, and I'm starving," protested Bowmer. Rogue grinned. "Aren't you always hungry?" he teased. Bowmer gave him a pouting glare in return. "Yes, I am, and this isn't helping any," she frowned. "Well, just be patient. Something will show up." Bowmer gave Rogue an increasingly sad look. "That's great, but patience doesn't fill my stomach," she pouted. She soon reeled in her line, checked the bait, and then cast it out again. A few minutes passed by after this, but still nothing was biting. Eventually, she got up and began pacing back and forth as Rogue gently jiggled his line. "Man, this is stupid. The fish are avoiding me on purpose. I could just feel it," she protested. "They're just fish, Bowmer. They don't know who you are, which is probably a good thing," teased Rogue. However, Bowmer wasn't very fond of being picked on at a time like this. "Trust me, they know who I am. They can smell my hunger. That's why they're hiding," she protested vehemently. Rogue furrowed his brow at this, but said nothing. Realizing that there had been no hits on his line either, he reeled it in and was surprised to find his bait gone. So he quickly rebaited it and cast it into the water again. But just as soon as he did, Bowmer's line suddenly and violently went taut and pulled on her with such force that it nearly ripped the rod out of her hands. "WHOA!" she exclaimed in surprise. "Oh yeah, fish on, baby." She then braced herself against the powerful tug of the fish as she pulled with all her might to reel it in. However, her sudden high-level expenditure of energy was now making her even hungrier than before. "Oh, you are so getting eaten in one bite, you freak," she roared. The line then thrashed around, back and forth, in and out, for several moments as the mysterious fish on the other end fought with all its might to free itself. Because of this, Bowmer pulled even harder on the line as she struggled to land the fish as it tried to pull her towards the water. But she wasn't about to let it as she dug her heels into the sand with defiant determination. "Oh yeah, this is a big one. If I can land this, we're going to eat for weeks," she exclaimed happily as she continued to fight. Rogue chuckled at this. "Yeah, more like 5 minutes," he thought to himself. He then watched quietly as her line continued to dance back and forth wildly. It wasn't long after this that the water in front of them began to froth and bubble ominously. Realizing that something big was about to happen, he pulled in his line and set the rod down on the rock next to himself before standing up. Moments later, a colossal-sized fish broke through the surface, a beast that was easily the size of a small ship, and then continued its relentless fight against Bowmer. Yet, despite her rapidly diminishing stamina, Bowmer refused to let the fish win, even if it cost her everything. Eventually, she was able to wrest it from the water, its glistening scales, a rainbow collage of blues, greens, and other colors sparkling vividly in the midday sun, over her head and onto the sandy beach behind her. She then looked at her successfully landed catch and sighed in relief. "I got it, Rogue. I got it," she exclaimed happily. But from what Rogue could see, she had used up nearly all her stamina bringing it in. This caused him to feel a hint of concern for her. It wouldn't be much of an issue for him to refill her stamina if it was absolutely necessary. But still, to see her in this condition bothered him. "Well done, Bowmer. You did a great job landing that. Now, how would you like to, Bowmer, you're going to cook that, right?" he said as he watched Bowmer dive on top of the fish and begin to eat it sushi style. "No time, man. I'm starving," she shouted as she gobbled down on the terrified fish as it desperately tried to throw her off. Rogue merely stood there and studied her in muted disbelief. Do you want me to start a fire so we can properly cook that? I'd hate to have to deworm you after you get done eating that entire fish raw," he replied. "That's what healing powers are for? Silly. she said happily as she continued to gorge herself on the fish with reckless abandon. Rogue pursed his lips incredulously. That's not how healing powers worked. Or at least, not how they were supposed to. Just then Rogue perked up as he suddenly felt the lake behind him begin to vibrate and quake ominously. While Bowmer was completely oblivious to this, having her face thoroughly buried in the fish's now partially consumed left side, Rogue was on high alert, just as he always was. He then turned towards the lack, where he soon spotted an ominous pool of bubbles rising up from beneath the water. Bowmer, something's coming, he said cautiously. However, the young woman completely ignored him. Just then, in a powerful explosion of flesh and water, a water serpent erupted out of the lake, sending waves and showers of water flying in every direction. Its long, coiled body then continued upwards for several hundred feet, slowly unwinding as it did, until it stood large and tall, like a great, throbbing totem pole of flesh. But again, Bowmer ignored this as she continued to eat her fish as fast as she could. Rogue quickly moved to put himself between her and the sea serpent as it hissed and glared angrily down at her. "Who dares to steal from my lake?" it roared angrily. However, Bowmer dismissed the serpent's challenge. "Steal? I'm fishing, pal. My catch is entirely legal," she said dismissively. The serpent glared at her spitefully. "That fish is mine. Surrender it now, or I will eat you along with it," it said. Bowmer wiped her mouth and then let out a loud belch. "Too late, pal. It's my dinner now," she replied. Rogue continued to stand between the serpent and Bowmer and glare at the beast. "Thou ignorant fools, prepare to meet my wrath," roared the serpent. It then reared back, its jaws open wide, and prepared to unleash a powerful, devastating water attack. Rogue, however, merely furrowed an eyebrow at this. "Are you really certain you want to fight us over a fish?" he asked. The serpent hissed angrily and bent forward, but then paused as it realized that the person standing in front of Bowmer was Rogue Dragon himself. Realizing who it was facing, the serpent drew its head back as it cautiously and slowly coiled its massive body back into the lack. Picking a fight with anyone else was no problem for the great sea monster. But picking a fight with Rogue himself was a death wish, and that was the last thing it wanted. "Fine, take the stupid fish, but I don't want to see you polluting my waters ever again." "Don't make myself clear," it growled. It then slowly disappeared beneath the surface of the lake, after which the waters settled down again and, one more, became calm. Bowmer, upon seeing this, took a victorious bite out of the colossal fish and grinned happily. "See? Not a problem," she quipped. Rogue grinned. "If you say so," he replied. Bowmer chuckled lightly at this. "So, you up for catching another fish?" she asked. A moment later, the serpent's head exploded above the water. "Stop stealing from my lake," it roared angrily. Rogue and Bowmer looked out across the water at the serpent, and then back at each other before slowly giving in to a deep and hearty belly laugh, much to the serpent's chagrin.